As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. Wise guys.
Today, Joseph Massino allegedly runs the Bonanno Crime family. He was indicted on federal charges of murder, conspiracy, and other crimes over 2 decades. Prosecutors said Massino was the last official boss of New York's 5 Mafia families who wasn't already in jail.
In the courtroom, Massino's wife Josephine spends her days glaring at her brother, Sal Vitale, whose testimony could land her husband in prison.
The important thing is the vow of a murder, to remain silent. So to actually break that vow and get up in front of a court and seal your boss's fate is the worst sin imaginable.
Vitale has broken that vow, agreeing to testify in exchange for leniency. Good-looking Sal saw everything, he says, including the 1981 triple murder of Massino's rivals at a Brooklyn social club. He also testified that Massino ordered the murder of the man responsible for allowing an FBI agent to infiltrate the Mafia, a case made famous in the movie Donnie Brasco.
If you're a rat.
More than 6 made members have agreed to cooperate for the government, and a number of members, including a very high-ranking member of the family, agreed to record conversations with the leadership of the Bonanno family.
Bonanno Crime family boss from the late 1980s to the early 2000s, Joseph Big Joey Massino would be the first American Mafia boss in history, not only to flip and turn federal cooperator, but to wear a wire and testify against his successor and acting boss, Vincent Baschiano, a.k.a. Vinny from the Bronx, a.k.a. Vinny Gorgeous, while the two were serving time together at the MDC in Brooklyn. Prior to Baschiano's arrest, he was appointed acting boss of the Bonanno family by Massino, who was already locked up at MDC Brooklyn on Rico charges, which included 7 murders, extortion, arson, loan sharking, illegal gambling, and money laundering, after several members of Massino's crew flipped on the boss, including his brother-in-law and underboss Sal Vitale. Massino was arrested in 2003 and convicted in 2004 and found guilty on all charges. Massino was also set to face a second trial, in which he would be tried for orchestrating the murder of the Bonanno's Montreal, Canada faction member, Gerlando Sciascia, or Shasha, where he would be looking at the death penalty if convicted due to a 1994 amendment to federal racketeering laws, allowing the feds to seek the death penalty for murders in aid of racketeering. Massino would hold off on cooperating with the FBI up until his guilty verdict in 2004, where it's then said Massino waited for the courtroom to clear before asking the judge to speak privately in his chambers, making Massino one of the most important organized crime figures in Cosa Nostra history, revealing some of the Mafia's most notorious leaders' long untold secrets. Before we get into the details of Massino's damaging testimony, where he even goes on to place his longtime friend and ally, the late Gambino boss John Gotti, as the trigger man during a murder that dates back to the early 1980s, let's first break down Massino's rise to power in Cosa Nostra and the events that would lead to his demise. Joseph Big Joe Massino, also nicknamed the Ear, a name inspired by Genovese boss Vincent Gigante, who told his men to refer to him by pointing to their chin rather than speak his name in order to throw off any possible FBI bugs in the area. Massino's men would refer to him by touching their ear. Joseph Massino was born January 10, 1943, to parents Adeline and Anthony Massino in New York City, and grew up in the working-class Maspeth section of Queens. Massino, who was said to have attended Grover Cleveland High School in Ridgewood, Queens, dropped out in the 10th grade. Massino was one of 3 brothers and was also a juvenile delinquent by the age of 12, and claims to have ran away from home to Florida at the age of 14. Massino would meet his wife Josephine Vitale in 1956 and would be married by 1960, also making him the brother-in-law of his future underboss Sal Vitale. Starting his fast track into organized crime, Massino was said to have started off his criminal career running a truck hijacking crew in Queens around the same time. An up-and-coming Gambino gangster named John Gotti was also running a hijacking crew in the same area. Because of the two men's mutual business interests, they would form a friendly relationship and would remain allies for many years to come. But it would later come out in trial that Massino received information from Genovese captain Barney Bellamo while awaiting trial in MDC that his Howard Beach neighbor and longtime ally John Gotti was plotting to take Massino out with none other than Massino's brother-in-law, Sal Vitale. A part of Massino and Baschiano's secretly recorded MDC conversation was played during Baschiano's trial, where Massino was heard saying, quote, "Well, I found out in here that him and John was plotting," while speaking about Sal Vitale and John Gotti. And Baschiano was heard saying, "I believe that." Using that excuse, Massino went on to testify to committing several murders with Gotti over the years, and Vitale, who turned federal cooperator in 2003, was first of the two men to put Gotti as the triggerman, alongside Massino, who later corroborated his story with certain details varying from person to person, but both consisting of men like Angelo Ruggiero, Frank DeCicco, and Sonny Black Napolitano, where Gotti was said to have shot a man named Vito Borelli on orders from Gambino boss Paul Castellano in 1980. Not long after dropping out of high school, Massino would link up with Bonanno boss Phillip Rusty Rastelli, who Massino referred to as Unc, and Rastelli would take Massino under the wing and school him to the ways of Cosa Nostra. On top of running his lucrative truck hijacking crew, Massino was also said to have had a love for the culinary arts, working side jobs as a cook at various restaurants and kitchens, and also working for Rastelli's catering business, running gambling and numbers rackets through a fleet of lunch trucks that delivered food to various routes at different job sites in and around Queens and Long Island. Massino would also go on to own his own lunch truck business, following in the footsteps of his rabbi, Phillip Rastelli. Rastelli would come out on top following the Banana War that took place from 1966 to 1969 after the retirement of former boss Joe Bonanno, who moved to Arizona after faking his own kidnapping and losing control of the family. Rastelli would rise to boss, but in 1975 would be arrested for extortion and sent to prison for 10 years. Around that same time, another gangster who was Joe Bonanno's underboss, Carmine LILO Galante, was being released from prison after serving 12 years on heroin trafficking charges and would immediately seize control of the family despite the fact Rastelli was already declared boss. Galante would be chopped down while eating lunch outside at Joe and Mary's restaurant in Bushwick, Brooklyn. A hit Massino was also said to have helped orchestrate for Rastelli. That hit would lead to yet another hit that involved three Bonanno captains, Alphonse Sonny Red Indelecato, Phillip Lucky Giaconne, and Dominick Big Trin Trinchera. The three captains were in the same crew as Galante and were said to have been plotting to kill Rastelli's leadership, who at the time was acting boss Joe Massino, and Capo Regime Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano. Napolitano and Massino were close, dating all the way back to the truck hijacking days with Gotti, with Sonny Black also securing his own crew. Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano is most famous for being the Bonanno family's biggest embarrassment, allowing undercover FBI agent Joe Pistone, better known by his undercover name Donnie Brasco, as portrayed in the movie Donnie Brasco starring Johnny Depp and Al Pacino, which would set in motion another murder plot by Massino to take out his old-time business partner and friend, a fate which was accepted by Napolitano, who on August 17, 1981, handed his jewelry and keys to a bartender, telling her he was called to a meeting and didn't think he'd be coming back before leaving the bar. Sal Vitale would later testify to Massino ordering the murder and himself being the man who would lure Black to his death and push him down a flight of stairs, where Ronald Monkey Man Filicomo and Bonanno capo Frank Lino shot Napolitano in the basement of Filicomo's parents' home. Napolitano's body would be dug up in 1982 with his hands cut off as a message for other wise guys to be careful who they introduce to the family. The undercover agent who infiltrated Napolitano's crew as Donnie Brasco was pulled off the operation after Black got so close with Pistone that he ordered him to kill the son of Sonny Red, Bruno Indelecato, which is when the feds rushed in and informed Sonny Black that Donnie Brasco was actually FBI agent Joe Pistone by showing Black a picture of Pistone in uniform, to which Black responded by saying, "So what?" As a result of the Bonannos allowing an FBI agent into the family business, a slew of indictments would come raining down on the family, with over 100 associates and members being arrested and convicted on various charges, including Massino, although Pistone's work would fail to get any members convicted on murder charges. And due to Napolitano's fatal error, the Bonanno family would be banished from the commission by the leaders of the other families, being the first of the 5 families to ever get kicked off the ruling panel. And although it would be a major embarrassment, some would say it was a blessing in disguise for Massino. Massino, who didn't become official boss until Rastelli's death in 1991, was the one who held control and ran the family for a majority of the 80s, was able to move more freely without having to answer to the commission, and would also avoid being a part of the highly publicized 1985 commission trial, where 8 high-ranking Mafia members would all be found guilty on Rico charges. For the next 15 plus years, Joe Massino would build the Bonanno family back up, making them even stronger, more powerful, and more wealthy than ever before. Massino was boss for over 100 made men, and even had control over international Montreal, Canada faction of soldiers and ties to crews in Sicily. According to one informant, in 2003, the Bonanno family was said to be worth over $100 million. Massino wasn't afraid to use violence to instill fear in his enemies and keep control over his men. Massino was so respected by his men that following Rastelli's death in 1991, although Massino was in prison at the time on a labor racketeering charge, he was still voted in as official boss. Massino would be released in 1993, and after sitting back watching the Gotti trial play out in the courts, as well as seeing the other bosses getting taken down by the FBI one by one, Massino would learn from their mistakes, and upon his release, Massino stepped all the way back from the streets, staying out of the limelight and away from FBI surveillance, running the family from behind the scenes, making sure none of his underlings communicated Mafia business directly to him, and banned members from using his name, telling them to only refer to him by touching their ear. Massino, noticing all the heat from law enforcement was mainly coming because of the murders being committed, he slowed down on the killing, but it would only last so long. Jolando Sciascia, or Shasha, aka George from Canada, would be gunned down on Massino's orders after disrespecting one of Massino's close friends, and simply because Shasha started being viewed as a threat. Shasha would be shot to death by Bonanno Patrick DiFilippo and Bonanno member Joe Spirito's SUV and dumped on the side of the road on March 18, 1999. Fast forward to January 9, 2003. After laying low for as long as he could and stacking up his millions, Massino's world would come crashing down when he was indicted and arrested on 8 murders, among other charges. On top of the 3 capos, Sonny Black and Shasha, Massino was accused of murdering or conspiring to murder Bonanno member Tony Mira in 1981 for being the first Bonanno member to befriend Joe Pistone, aka Donnie Brasco. Cesare Boneventre, who's also part of the rebel faction alongside Galante and the 3 capos in April 1984, and Gabriel Infante, a Mafia hitman who was killed in 1987 for botching 3 different pieces of work and was accused of talking to the feds. Boneventre was one of the 2 bodyguards of Carmine Galante, who was said to have set Galante up back in 1979 after being approached by the commission, and was also a major player in the Pizza Connection case, where the men were importing heroin from Sicily and distributing it from pizza parlors in New York City. Boneventre was originally in on the 3 capos' plan to take over the family from Rastelli and Massino, but was said to have switched sides last minute, which already left a bad taste in Massino's mouth. So when Massino went on the run in 1982, after receiving word that an indictment was coming down, Boneventre never made any attempts to see Massino, so Massino began viewing him as a threat. Cesare Boneventre was also leader of the Sicilian Zips, considered to be a serious killer and suspected of being involved in over 20 murders, and was gaining heavy influence with the family. So when Phillip Rusty was paroled in April of 1983, him and Massino decided to take Boneventre out before he would get a chance to try and overthrow Rusty. Rastelli lured Boneventre to a fake meeting and had him whacked after his men picked him up in their car and shot him 2 times in the head. But to their surprise, Boneventre would pop up and grab the steering wheel, trying to crash the car. Sal Vitale, who was driving the car, was able to pull into their destination, which was a garage, where Boneventre crawled out of the car and was shot 2 more times on the garage floor and killed by Luis Anastasio. Boneventre would be chopped up into pieces by Gabriel Infante and placed in 3 different 55-gallon drums, where the 3 men would take it to the 4th floor offices of a trading company warehouse in Garfield, New Jersey. Now, with Massino staying out of the cut and having Sal Vitale as underboss and Anthony Spero as his consigliere, Massino spent most of his time at his legitimate businesses. King Caterers, which provided food to New York City street vendors located in Farmingdale, Long Island, and Casablanca's restaurant in Maspeth, Queens, which was an infamous mob hangout at one point in time, where Massino was part owner. And due to Massino's laying low and hard work, he was able to rebrand the family and regain the Bonanno family a seat on the Mafia's ruling panel, the Commission. One NYPD organized crime detective was quoted saying, "Massino was careful and a very smart guy. He lives by the old school rules. He's wise to surveillance, and he believes La Cosa Nostra should remain secret." Something that would change after the Bonanno's new leadership took a couple of big hits. With business going great between the narcotics business, loan sharking, gambling unions, and joker poker machines, Massino's underboss Sal Vitale would be arrested in 2001 after pleading guilty to his role in an extortion scheme on Long Island. Also in 2001, Massino's consigliere Anthony Spero would be convicted on racketeering and murder charges and sentenced to life in prison. After replacing Spero with Anthony T.G. Graziano in 2002, he too would be indicted on murder, murder conspiracy, gambling, extortion, and drug trafficking charges. Massino was able to avoid being indicted in all 3 cases, but it wouldn't be long before Big Joey would face the inevitable. On January 9, 2003, he would be indicted for the 8 murders he orchestrated and committed during his reign as boss, and 8 of Massino's friends and family would flip and cooperate against who the press would call the last godfather of New York City. On July 30th, 2004, after being found guilty on all charges and now facing the death penalty for the Shasha murder, Massino flipped and began cooperating from his prison cell in MDC. After Massino's acting boss, Vinny Gorgeous, got locked up, Massino agreed to wear a recording device, and after being strategically placed near Baschiano, he was able to get him to admit to ordering the murder of Bonanno associate Randy Pizzolo and plotting the murder of a federal prosecutor. For Massino's cooperation, he would end up only having to serve 10.5 years in prison for all of his crimes and would be released into the Witness Protection Program at 70 years old. During Massino's testimony, he would tell all about his long history of crime with the Bonanno family dating back to his teenage years. He admitted to paying an NYPD detective $500 to avoid prison in 1960, when Massino, who was a bookmaker at the time, was busted running a gambling operation. He also admitted to paying another detective $10,000 to avoid a burglary charge. Massino told the courts he committed his first murder in 1960, killing a Bonanno associate named Tommy Zumo. He also admitted to setting up the murder of Joseph Dodo Pistori in 1976. Massino told the story of being made in a Queens bar on June 14, 1977, alongside his fellow Bonannos, Joe Chili, Anthony Spero, and 3 other men, by the soon-to-be-slain Carmine Galante. Before Big Joey was arrested, he was well aware the feds were coming for him, so he called a meeting with Baschiano and gave him the okay to kill whoever he needed, and was told to use the word Jocko when he wanted to order a hit by saying Jocko in the intended target's name. In Massino's testimony, he would tell the court that Baschiano wanted to kill Massino's underboss, Sal Vitale, because Baschiano believed Vitale was an informant. But rather than kill his brother-in-law and leave his sister without a husband, Massino was said to have unofficially shelved Vitale, which is the excuse Vitale would later use when he turned government informant. Massino spent 5 days on the stand in Baschiano's trial. Vincent Baschiano, who's already serving life for a separate conviction in 2007, was looking at the death penalty if convicted, but when Baschiano lost the trial on May 9, 2006, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the jury chose not to give Vinny Gorgeous the death penalty. Overall, Massino admitted to taking part in 10 murders during his testimony, and Big Joey was sentenced to 2 life sentences, but because of his cooperation, he would work out a deal for him and his wife to keep their home, but Massino had to forfeit $7 million, as well as $250,000 in gold bars. Massino testifying was a major blow to Cosa Nostra as a whole, being the first Mafia boss to flip, once again showing the treachery in the life and proving that the Mafia's code of silence is no longer prevalent. And the fact is, when it comes to La Cosa Nostra, it's every man for himself. And in reality, nobody could be trusted besides the few stand-up guys who took their time like a man.